Today's episode of the Lutheran Cartographer is brought to you by Audible. Get a free trial offer with a free audiobook at audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer. The Lutheran Cartographer, Episode 17. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer. Today we are joined by Pastor Joshua LaFeve. He is the pastor of Immanuel Lutheran Church in Leland, Michigan. Pastor LaFeve, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nicholas. Good to be here.
Tell us a little bit about Leland and how you ended up there.
Leland is in the northwest part of the lower peninsula of Michigan. Leland is on a peninsula. Leland is actually an isthmus. So in some ways you could say it's a peninsula within a peninsula within a peninsula. Makes it a very desirable place to be. So Leland, Michigan, and the Leelanau Peninsula, and the northwest part of the lower peninsula of Michigan. I've been here 4.5 years as sole pastor of Immanuel Lutheran in Leland, and my wife and I grew up. We're from Lansing, Michigan, and the lower part, downstate of the lower peninsula of Michigan. This is my second parish. I came from Atonement Lutheran in Spring Valley, California. That was my first parish right out of the seminary. Was there for about 4 years. That's in the San Diego area, East San Diego County. And Immanuel extended a divine call for me to serve as pastor here in May 2015.
Excellent. So I'd imagine that there are quite the contrast between California and Michigan. What are some of the things that you would highlight to our listeners who are perhaps curious about those contrasts?
Yeah, might start with the fact that Leland is on the 45th parallel and San Diego is not. So you have to let your imagination go from there, right, about what that means. Leland is in the Midwest. San Diego is not. Is another thing you could say there. But San Diego, what's interesting about that, you turn on the television there in San Diego and you get 4 weather reports. You get the weather for the right on the ocean. You get the weather for the inlands, the foothills. You get the weather report for the mountains, which we could go up to a mountain town. Hey, you're talking, pales in comparison where you are. You're talking about 5,000 feet up, something like that. But if less than an hour drive, you could go from or maybe about an hour, you could go from the ocean up to the mountains there. And then you get a weather report for the high desert, which is just beyond the mountain range there and east of San Diego. So it probably goes without saying you don't have that kind of geographic diversity here in Leland, but it's diverse in its own way, especially in comparison to other parts of Michigan and the Midwest. Up here on the peninsula, you've got the sand dunes and you've got a number of different lakes and things like that.
Okay, and how does it compare culturally? You mentioned before that, well, of course, it's different from California to the Midwest, but for those of our listeners who perhaps haven't been to California or haven't been in the Midwest, how would you start to articulate that difference?
California is much more laid back. Where I was in East San Diego, you've got some natives, but you did have a lot of Midwestern transplants there as well. But just very easygoing, very laid back in comparison to the Midwest. And you can imagine where that kind of easygoing, laid back approach could take you, or where it might go in terms of politics and in terms of your posture toward religion, toward the Christianity, things like that. I like to joke with people when I was out in San Diego. You guys' attitude, it's as if God is going to turn an eye, or look the other way because you live in San Diego. It's kind of an interesting There's some truth to that, obviously a stereotype.
All right, so tell us a little bit more about Leland. What do you like about the area?
Yeah, a lot to like. I think you've probably gathered that by now. A lot to like as far as the topography. It's in comparison to the rest of Michigan, which is very flat, especially downstate in the lower peninsula. You've got some with the sand dunes and things like that. You've got some interesting, hills and rolling hills and things up here. Um, Folks around here will say that if you want, if you're driving straight on a road for longer than a mile, you're no longer in the peninsula. It's a very curvy roads up here. Yeah, you've got the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore right around the area. As I said before, Leland itself is in an isthmus, so you have a North Lake Leelanau that surrounds it. You've got Lake Michigan to the west, and then you have the Leland River that kind of cuts through and it cuts out part of the village of Leland here. So it makes it a desirable place to live, a desirable place to retire, also an expensive place to live, especially right in the village of Leland, right around where the church is. Very expensive place to live. But main industries, you have the tourist industry and you have farming, cherry farming and apple farming. Right now would be the big farming industries here. So.
So, we've talked about the good parts. What are some of the not so great parts of Leland?
Yeah, definitely the best parts would be the summers, the cherry and apple farms, the wineries that come with that, the beauty of God's creation, the ability to enjoy that. But some of I don't know, I hesitate to say the term the worst parts, but maybe the challenging parts would be the winters and the especially January and February, those winter months. A lot of folks will head out of town. A lot of you don't have tourists up here really at that time, and a lot of the locals and the business owners, they'll use it as an opportunity. That slow period as an opportunity to shut down the business and go down south, go down for on a cruise or go down into Florida for a month or 2 months. And so it can you can experience a lot of solitude around those times, and then you combine that with the snowfall, with the cold, and with the less sunshine. Yeah, it could be a little challenging, which makes you appreciate the summers all the more. But yeah, speaking of snow, I think I looked this up recently. The average snowfall here in Leland, in Leelanau County, is about 115 inches of snowfall. The national average, compare that with the national average from what I've seen, is a little less than 30 inches. So it gives you something to know what to expect. Some other things that are a little challenging. Uh, Whereas the tourism is the industry that allows people, part of what allows people to live up here and to make a living up here. That's also a challenging part for the locals. They'll be the first to tell you that, the tourists, right?
Yeah.
uh, and the navigating, around the tourists. It's almost, it can be like playing a game of Frogger in the summer, with the streets on the little small towns that dot the landscape. You're also a little bit isolated up here. The nearest big city is Traverse City. So that's about, if you're driving right from Leland to Traverse City, that's going to take you about 35 minutes, and in decent weather. And that's where in Traverse City is where you have all of the big grocery stores and things like that.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about that. So we've already oriented our listeners geographically that you're in the northwestern part of Michigan, kind of on a peninsula yourself, but many people orient themselves in terms of distances to larger places. So how far is it in terms of driving time or in miles from where you are to, say, Detroit or South Bend or to Chicago?
Yep. To Detroit, you're talking about 4.5 hours. To Chicago. I've never made the drive myself from here, but I've heard it's about 5 hours, but you're dealing with the time change as well. So probably similar to South Bend, 4 hours,
Okay.
something like that.
All right. Good deal.
4.5 hours to Ann Arbor. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The one thing I should mention as well that I forgot to mention just a moment ago about some of the challenges in this area would be the affordable housing. That's always a challenge that you'll hear folks say up in Leelanau County would be affordable housing.
Okay. So housing prices aren't the Midwestern standard mid to low. It's much more expensive than that.
Yep, yep. And a lot of that is because you're in a resort area. You're in a tourist area, a place where a lot of people retire, a lot of people want to be, people from Chicago and downstate and other Midwestern states. They will purchase a second home up here and come up in the summers and that sort of thing.
Okay. So, one of the challenges that you alluded to, and I just want to make sure that I understood your point and summarize it a bit. It sounds like with so many snowbirds, people leaving in the middle of the winter, that it might be more of a challenge to build community with those that you want to get close to. Is that a good summary? Is that not quite grasping your point?
It could be. It could be a challenge. Uh, we've found here, I can speak to what I know, which is the congregation and life here in Leland, since my family and I, since we live here in Leland, we're able to find, there's community all year round with just because you've got a school, the public school's right next door, and so they don't have the opportunity, to escape in the winters there, and in the church you have some snowbirds, but you'll have folks that'll stay year round, and even the snowbirds still stay pretty connected. As far as getting building community and friendships, if you're out of the area, not from the area, that the challenge there lies in the fact that you're the well, you got to understand then small town dynamics. So people already have their communities. They've already got their connections and their relationships. They've had them established for generations, or for years, for many years, and so that can be a little difficult to break into that. But what we've found is it's fairly easy to build community around the church, within our congregation and within the church, and then kind of go out from there.
Yeah, the other week we were talking with Pastor Brademeyer from Oaks, North Dakota, and he was talking about that small town life and how to start plugging in addition to, of course, going to church. What else would you say is kind of a good way to think about how to start building that community if you move to a small town?
Yeah, you've just got to make an effort to jump in different ways, and so otherwise, yeah, you can end up isolating yourself pretty easily, and so make an intentional effort to get involved in the community where you're able to. So, I would maybe suggest to somebody that's new to the area or moving to the area, hang back, observe, get to know folks a little bit, take stock of what your interests are, and take stock of what's out there, where the need might be, and then kind of move in and try to find a way to get involved there. So I'll give some examples here. My family and I, we live right in Leland, and on my day off, I typically take a Friday off as a family day, a day out of the office. It just so happens that the public library has children's story time on Friday. So we go, sometimes walk or sometimes drive to the library there, and get a lot of, we've built a lot of connections there with people, unchurched folks from the community, younger families, just doing that consistently, 1.5 hours a week, for a few years now, and that allows us to get to know folks, to kind of get into the community a bit more there.
So let's transition to talking a little bit more about what it's like to raise a family there. You've already mentioned the schools, the library. What's it like being a parent?
It's a great place to raise a family, and you'll hear that from a lot of people. A great place to raise a family. Hear that all the time, and you see evidence of it in the fact that now there are many children that were raised here and went off to college, went off to the big cities, and are starting their own families. Or thinking about starting their own families and moving back.
Oh, wow.
I've that's a trend to keep an eye on there, especially, and what makes it possible is the fact that a few things that can make it possible for a person to do that up here is digital technologies that allow a person to live where they love and work remotely, and then um, some folks that move back, they're inheriting property. They're able to build a home on land that relatives own. They're inheriting a home, so that makes it possible for some to do that. And then others that just want to be here and want to raise kids here because it's a great place to raise a family. They'll find a way to make ends meet. Shovel snow in the winters. They'll do landscaping in the summers, that kind of thing. Maybe not what they would be doing if they lived in a bigger city, but they make those sacrifices because they want to. Maybe they grew up here and they want to raise their kids here.
So, what are those features that you think draw people back? What do you think is so good for kids in the area?
The small. You can start with the small town uh, feel here. It's small town rural settings, just slower pace, a little more laid back. Everybody knows everyone, and there's a level of accountability in that as well. I mean, I heard somebody say before, you can't get away with anything here, and if you think you're getting away with something, you're not. On the one hand, there might be one person that'll be thinking, oh boy, I don't know, that just everybody knows my business, but that's small town dynamics. And the other side, though, in a more positive way of thinking about that, I mean, there's a level of accountability there with that can be very nice, and there's an opportunity there to really establish some deep roots and some very deep human connections with people and relationships with people there. But it could just take a little bit of time and take a little longer. Leland, the Leland Public School next door is also a highly rated public school in the state of Michigan. Whenever I say that, I always find myself saying for a public school and adding that qualifier, but which might tip my hand a little bit there. But it is a good for a public school, I think, and you have a lot of folks will come back to put their kid, they might move back here to live in this area and enjoy the beauty of the creation, enjoy some of the small town dynamics and things like that they appreciated, enjoy that laid back part. But mostly what they're doing is they want to come back and put their kids back in this school and raise their kids here and have them go to that school because they had a positive experience there.
That makes sense. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsor. If you're listening to this podcast on the go, you already know the power of having audio in your ears. And Audible wants to put the books that you want to listen to there as well with their free 30-day trial offer that comes with a free audiobook. If you're not sure what book you should check out, this month I'm recommending that you check out Luther's Bondage to the Will. It's one of his great treatises and the one that he looked back on and said was one of the most important. So you can check that out at audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer. Let's get back to our guest. So we've talked about what it's like to raise a family there. What's it like being a Lutheran in Leland?
To answer that, Lutheran in Leland, back up and get the history just a little bit of Immanuel Leland, started by German immigrant farmers. And that's what you kind of have with a lot of the small towns that dot the landscape of Leelanau County is you've got different ethnic groups. And so You have the Scandinavian or the Norwegian Lutherans, in the east side of the peninsula, and then we're here on the west side of the peninsula, Leland, the German Lutherans. You've got the Polish Catholics just south of us, and so you're here, a Lutheran here in Leland, you're going to have that kind of rootedness of German, that the German farmers. But then you also have a lot of transplant Lutherans, especially from downstate. That's any growth that Immanuel Leland, most, I shouldn't say any, but most growth that Immanuel Leland will experience will be from the transfers from other areas, transfers from downstate, that sort of thing.
Now, let me interrupt for just a moment. When you say downstate, we're talking south of you?
Yep.
All right.
So that would be the lower part of the lower peninsula, where all the big cities are, really, like Detroit and Lansing and Grand Rapids and Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, Ann Arbor.
Okay. A lot of the growth comes from there, and then in the community itself, would you characterize it kind of much the same as other parts of America where it's becoming more secularized as a whole, or how would you characterize the town in terms of its church attendance or its awareness of the faith?
I would characterize it the way you said, that similar to the nation as a whole. I think the statistics I've seen, about 60% or so unchurched. The other thing you got to consider is, again, getting back to the small town rural dynamics, is that I, as a pastor, I might have tons of connections with unchurched people in the community. I can go to the grocery store and see a lot of people that aren't my parishioners. I can sit down and have coffee, and I do from time to time have coffee with a group of guys. None of maybe one or two of the 15, 20 are parishioners, and you might be able to be their pastor there at the library or at the beach or at the grocery store or something like that, in the sense that they may ask you questions and approach you in a way they might approach their own pastor. They're never going to step foot in your church, and I mean, well, or it would take it would take the work of the Holy Spirit, uh, but it would be unlikely, say it that way, just because perhaps their family is Methodists or Roman Catholics. And with those small town dynamics the way that they are, it would almost be like committing social suicide, to join the Lutheran Church.
I see.
Yeah, so you do have some of that, a
Okay.
lot of that.
All right, so let's transition to talk a little bit about the hidden gems, or the not so hidden gems that somebody that is passing through Leland or is thinking about moving there should definitely check out or know about.
Yeah, Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore is the first that comes to mind if you're talking Leelanau County up in this area. At I think Good Morning America a while back, they ranked it as the or the most beautiful place, in the country or something like that. And you being from the West Coast and me spending time in the West Coast, think, have you been to the coasts a little bit? But it is very beautiful. It is very Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore is very beautiful, and so you get a lot of folks that will come up here, and with some of the recent publicity, um, that you've seen a boom in tourism in the past few years, and folks will come up here and just have a lot of fun on the lakes, on the trails, just a lot of fun on the water. Um, You've got Leelanau Conservancy hiking trails in Leelanau County that are fun to go on. As far as restaurants, the you have really great places, really great shops actually, and great places to eat here in Leelanau County and in Traverse City. A lot of that has to do with tourism, and because you have a large retirement population up here, so they will spend a lot of money going out to eat, and so you have really great places to eat. And I would recommend a place right down the street from where we live. That's a place that gets a lot of reviews. I don't recommend it because I've been there, because I've not been there, because I haven't saved up enough money yet to go there, but but I say it's the Riverside Inn in Leland, because it's in Leland and it is ranked as one of the best restaurants in the peninsula. There's also, yeah, you'll find a lot of those good places to eat just in the different towns here in Leland County. So some of the different towns that you have would be Northport to the north, Leland, Sutton's Bay, which would be uh, east of Leland, and then Glen Arbor is another big tourist town. One interesting feature about Leelanau County that I didn't say yet, but it sort of plays into the hidden gem kind of thing, maybe, is you have no franchises up here. Uh, you
Huh.
you had you had a Subway up here until about a couple of months ago, and now the Subway's gone. That was the only franchise, and now no longer. So you have no franchise restaurants or hotels or grocery stores or anything like that. So it's kind of cool. I mean, it can make things a little pricier, but if you need to get things cheaper, or if you gotta go to you have a want to satisfy your craving for McDonald's, you just go down to Traverse City. Yeah, but so that's kind of neat. I don't know if that would be a hidden gem concept or not. But.
So, Pastor LaFeve, as we start thinking about closing out the podcast, let's talk a little bit about somebody that is thinking about moving to Leland or that part of Michigan. What kind of advice would you have for them? What sort of person would suit that area well, do you think?
Yeah, start with your second question first. What kind of person would suit this area well? Someone who enjoys the outdoors, their family enjoys the outdoors, they're okay with a little bit of solitude, they're okay with some snow, uh, with some longer winters. So there would be that part of it, I would say. Um, and then your other advice that I would give, maybe just to reiterate some of the things and reach back for some of the things I'd said earlier, should be get get out, get outside, try to make if you're going to move here, try to make an intentional effort to get involved in a community, get connected with a church, that sort of thing. But then also you'd want to have a plan for some of the challenges, not just we already talked about the weather challenges, but some of the housing challenges, things as well. You got to have a plan for how you're going to handle that, and make sure that I think the other thing that would go along with it is make sure that you have a source of income coming up here, because there's not or a plan for that, right? Because it's not like going, oh, I'll just go move there and then you find work. It's not going to be that easy up in just the nature of this area.
Okay, sounds good. Alrighty, so what are your parting thoughts for our listeners today?
Well, thank you for having me on, Nicholas. Really appreciated this. And the guess parting thought would be, wherever you live, and wherever the Lord should have you, that rejoice in the gifts that the Lord has given you, namely the gift of His Son Jesus Christ, and as He gives that gift in word and sacrament, and find a way and a place, community, church community, where you can receive from pastor God's grace in Christ, and rejoice in the gifts of the gospel.
Amen. Well said. Thank you again for your time today. God's peace.
God's peace. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. Regular listeners may notice that I forgot to ask Pastor LaFeve about what he would like to point you guys towards. And so wrote him an email. He got back to me and said, hey, if you could check out the Immanuel's website at Immanuel leland.360unite.com/home. That'd be great. Also, check out the church's Facebook page, their YouTube channel, and their music director and organist has a one hymn a week show on YouTube. You can find that, a link to that, on the show notes page. So links to all that good stuff will be at lutherancartographer.com/17. Please check that out. I'd also encourage you to check out that Audible offer if that sounds like something you'd be interested in. That's at audibletrial.com/lutherancartographer. Take a moment to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher, and while you're there, if you could leave me a rating or a review, I'd really appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Nicholas Weber. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.